And so I'd like to welcome you all to number 127.
Oh, wow.
Yes, of the Circle of Wine Writers Let's Talk series.
Yes.
Today's topic is let's talk about democratizing fine wine and Regenics with Steve Smith, Master of Wine. Extend a welcome to those of you joining for the first time, either members or non-members. The Circle was founded in 1960 in the UK, and today we have over 270 members worldwide. And today it splits 50-50 in the UK and overseas. Members comprise of wine writers, educators, broadcasters, and other professional communicators. There's more information about the Circle on our website, and also you can join online there as well. I'd now like to hand over to Rosemary George, who is also the Circle's president, who would like to kindly agree to introduce Steve today. Over to you, Rosemary.
Thank you, Andrea. Steve, I'm delighted to introduce you to the assembled company. I was actually trying to remember when we first met, and you would have been a viticulturist at Villa Maria sometime in the mid-90s, and you very kindly read my viticulture chapter for me for my book on New Zealand wine, and were not too rude about it, thank God. And then, well,
It
more
didn't
recently,
require much editing.
sorry?
It didn't require much editing,
No, it
Rosemary.
did
You did a
require
great.
that. Phew, thank goodness for that. But I think, I've just recently read your CV. I mean, it is one of the most impressive CVs I've ever seen because from Villa Maria, you went on to Craggy Range and put that new wine estate on the map in Hawke's Bay. And you are now the Smith part of Smith and Chef and have done great things in Hawke's Bay, sort of in a more, independent capacity. So you were the first viticulturist to pass the Master of Wine exams. You're a fellow of the New Zealand Wine Growers. And now you're also featured in the Hawke's Bay Wine Growers Hall of Fame, and you have an honorary doctorate from Lincoln University, which is will be quite a mouthful. And I mean, in the past, when I've listened to something you've been presenting, it's always been fascinating and mind broadening, and that is what I'm expecting this afternoon. So over to you, Steve.
Well, that's something to look to keep up to. I don't know I don't know whether I'm going to be able to achieve that, but we'll see how we
Oh, you
go.
will, you will.
Nice to see some familiar faces, and also some new faces that I haven't met yet, but have heard of. So I was hoping to do today's session. Actually, I'm actually in New Plymouth, which was settled by an Englishman in the 1850s and called it Plymouth after Plymouth in England. It is on the west coast of the North Island of New Zealand, an amazingly spectacular farming part of the country, but it's dominated by an amazing mountain called Taranaki Mong or Mount Taranaki, which I was hoping, in fact, I'd found a beautiful spot to have Mount Taranaki as the backdrop to today's thing. But unfortunately, we are on the coast and we're shrouded by clouds, so you can't see it. So after all of that beautiful scene setting that I did yesterday, it's going to disappoint. So we're on the inside of a camping ground kitchen at the moment because my wife and I are on a garden tour. There's Taranaki is also one of the world's most famous regions for rhododendrons and gardens and some spectacularly beautiful gardens. So we've been doing that, but it's sorry I couldn't get the backdrop of Mount Taranaki for you. Sort of interesting. I was in Burgundy at an Arini event in June, and it made me realize that I couldn't be further away from home when you're sitting in Burgundy, because if you are sitting in Beaune and you put a line through Middle Earth, through the middle of the Earth,
Mm.
you end up in the eighth continent of the world, on the edge of the eighth continent of the world, just south of the Chatham Islands, which is part of New Zealand. The thing that you don't know about the eighth continent of the world, it's called Zealandia. It's one of the largest continents as well, but 97% of it is underwater. So that's why you don't know too much about it. There's only two parts of Zealandia that are above water: New Zealand and New Caledonia. And it is the antipode of Burgundy. So when we grow Chardonnay and Pinot Noir in New Zealand, you cannot be further away from Burgundy. And this sort of idea of from Burgundy through Middle Earth to Middle Earth. Of course, the famous Lord of the Rings analogy that Peter Jackson started is sort of an interesting one for me anyway. So, and I think, you know, the exciting thing about that really, again, sitting in Burgundy thinking about this, is that we're so far away from Burgundy, yet what we see certainly with Chardonnay and certainly with Pinot, and a lot of people see that this is a Southern Hemisphere place that can sort of feel a little bit like the wines have some of the heart and soul that comes from Burgundy. So I think it's a really interesting and fascinating thing. And you know, if you look at New Zealand at the moment, I think in a world where the wine world is hard, it's tough from a wine producer's perspective, it's tough at every level. But I think one of the most exciting parts of New Zealand at the moment is what's happening with Chardonnay. And if you look at a collection of the finest Chardonnays out of New Zealand and put them on a table, I'd like to think they deserve to be on the same table as some of the greatest Chardonnays from that famous region in Burgundy. And it's really interesting to see how that has come about over what is a very short space of time. I mean, I think in a couple of years' time, we celebrate the 50th anniversary of the first Sauvignon Blanc vine being planted. I mean, it's amazing that New Zealand's come from nowhere to somewhere in a generation. You know, New Zealand Sauvignon has been an absolute flag bearer for us and one of the sort of the wine world's phenomenons in the last 20 or 30 years. The real challenge with that is that when I travel around the world, it seems to me that Sauvignon, certainly from a commercial point of view, dominates everything that's to do with New Zealand, and that is something that is starting to become a challenge for a bunch of New Zealand producers, where Chardonnay and Pinot is their major story. It's hard to get a voice when the most dominant voice is around Sauvignon. And so for us, you know, a little bit about what we do, Brian and I collectively own three fine wine producing companies, Smith and Chef, which we started in 2016, based out of Hawke's Bay, with a Marlborough Sauvignon to sit alongside that, making wine from some of the vineyards that I've known for 30 or 40 years. Yes, Rosemary, it was the early 90s that I saw you, so we're going back a long time, which is interesting. But some of those vineyards I planted 30 or 40 years ago, and Brian and I are now making wine from some of those vineyards in Hawke's Bay and in Marlborough. But we also bought Pyramid Valley, which is sort of probably was New Zealand's first sort of cult winery, really. Mike and Claudia Wessing searched the world for finding a site to grow great Chardonnay and Pinot. He's from California. She's part American, part German. Mike had spent a lot of time in Burgundy and searched the world for his place to grow great Chardonnay and Pinot that reminded him of his experiences in Burgundy. And when he was doing this, he used to take soil samples and send them back to Claude Bourguignon, of course, the famous soil scientist out of Burgundy. And Claude used to say whether it's good or whether it's not. And he kept going until he went to this property in the foothills of the Southern Alps of New Zealand, where he found these limestone clay soils. And the story was that he sent the soil back to Claude in Burgundy, and Claude rang him up on an international phone call, which was not inexpensive at the time, and said, "Mike, I thought you were looking in New Zealand. These soils come from Burgundy." So I always thought that was a really great story. I didn't know whether it was true or not, but sometimes you don't let the truth get in the way of a good story. But I saw Claude in June of this year in Burgundy, and in front of a bunch of very influential people. I think it was Pauline Vicquet said, "Steve, you tell this story. Is it true?" I said, "Well, we're going to find out now because Claude's right beside me." So, and he verified that it was. So, Mike found this amazing site, genuinely cool climate, Chardonnay and Pinot Noir property, planted 2 hectares of vines, and we've now planted another 5 or 6 hectares of vines on that property, focused entirely on Chardonnay and Pinot Noir. and then and bottled as a lot of small parcel wines. The Botanicals collection wines comes from a collection of 4 very small parcels on the Waikari property. And then alongside that, we bought a wonderful Pinot Noir vineyard called Lobo Ferry in Central Otago in 2018, which is already established. And that vineyard is now the Central Otago home for Pyramid Valley. So the thing for us is it's a very different look at the wine world from New Zealand than what we did at Craggy, which was, you know, based on Sauvignon alongside Chardonnay and Pinot and Syrah is another story. This is very different. It tells the story of New Zealand Chardonnay and Pinot and New Zealand fine wine. And I think the really interesting thing for us is getting noticed, to tell you the truth, because New Zealand is so much about Sauvignon, and sometimes it's really hard for the fine wines of New Zealand to get the stories that they need to tell. Do they deserve to be on the same table, and what are the stories we want to tell with those? So that's been part of our journey, and we've continued on this idea of high density, very much a Burgundification of the Chardonnay and Pinot Noir story, if you want to use a word that Guy Woodward developed this year, in the last week or so, when he published that really good piece in Tim Atkins' journal. So that's what we're about, and the good thing now is I think we've had 2 or 3 good vintages in a row that we're going to be able to tell that story really strongly. So it's very unusual to find places in the world now where it is genuinely cool, and I think even some of the cooler parts, even Burgundy is getting warmer, and a lot of cooler parts of the New World are saying that they're cool, but they're still challenged by significant heat as climate change starts to impact on everyone. And I think one of the things for us in New Zealand that we feel comfortable about is the fact that we're surrounded by this amazing Pacific Ocean, and we're this island nation. And when you are in that position, the chances of getting excessive heat, like really hot conditions, that a lot of Western Europe and Western USA, Australia, and South Africa are seeing, are very much lower because we're influenced so much by the ocean. And so I think that's New Zealand's little spot in this world is this sort of new world home to genuinely cool climate fine wine based around Chardonnay and Pinot Noir. So that's the story that we're certainly looking at, and it's something that we feel that we've got lots of great credentials from a viticultural point of view, and for us it's about building that reputation now. How do we deserve to be on the same table? In terms of other things that are happening in New Zealand at the moment, I think there's some interesting new wine styles starting to emerge. I think probably the most exciting variety that I see on the horizon in New Zealand right now is Albarino. And interestingly, if you look at the home of Albarino in Galicia and look at the climate there and transpose that to other places in the world, it's pretty close to the Hawke's Bay and Gisborne regions of New Zealand. Albarino is interesting. It needs rainfall. A lot of great varieties don't require rainfall, don't like rainfall. But Albarino requires humidity and requires warmth at the same time. It's a very unusual great variety from a growing point of view, and very, I guess, unique to its place in Galicia. And so it needs humidity and it needs warmth. And if you think about it, there's very few places in the world that also have that same characteristic of enough warmth and humidity that goes alongside it. And Hawke's Bay is certainly that. The Nelson region, I think if you look at New Zealand at the moment, the best Albarinos are coming out of Nelson and Hawke's Bay. And I think the exciting thing about that is I think it sits alongside what people think New Zealand wine is about. I think people think New Zealand wine as being the home to some of the world's most refreshing white wines. That's what people see when they're drinking Sauvignon Blanc, and I think you see that stamp across our Chardonnay and across our Pinot Gris and those sort of wines. But Albarino is almost an amazing example of that happening. And while it's early days, we've got to remember that Sauvignon Blanc was started by Ross Spence when he took it from California and planted it in his vineyard in Waimaku 50 odd years ago. Albarino's probably in a sort of similar situation to maybe 50 years ago, and I think it's a really exciting wine style that is part of our Smith and Chef portfolio, and you're starting to see some of New Zealand's really best producers picking up Albarino and starting to make some fascinating wines. If you look at the Neudorf Albarino, particularly, I think out of Nelson is really, really smart wine, and there's a couple of producers out of Hawke's Bay as well, us included. So I think that's great as well. I think the other thing that we're starting to see in New Zealand is this emergence of beauty and grace in red wines. I think if you look what's happening with Pinot Noir and Syrah at the moment, particularly, I think we've all grown up a little bit. For some of us, it's taken longer than others. But we've all grown up a little bit, and with the vineyard maturity and the vineyards now being planted in the right sites with the right selections and clones.
Steve, a lady, Michelle Padberg's just got a comment she's made. Yeah. Michelle, have you unmute? Are you able to unmute yourself? Maybe not. What she said is, she says, as you mentioned, it is hard to be heard in the enthusiasm for Sauvignon Blanc. What is your marketing like to make people pay attention to these other wines?
Watch this space. It's a great question, and I think for us, the fine wine world is about reputation, and I think it's how do we deserve to be on the same table as some of these great wines, and how do we appreciate what Sauvignon has done for New Zealand, and alongside it, I mean, I think it's fair to say that I think the New Zealand industry could have done a much better job of telling two stories, of telling the Sauvignon Blanc story and then telling the Chardonnay and Pinot Noir story alongside it. We have some interesting plans, to tell you the truth, Michelle, for telling that story that we're going to be a little bit brave about as we move forward. That will be sometime towards next year. I think it's important. I mean, one of the really interesting things is who are we talking to, and I sort of, we talk about fine wine consumers and collectors and all this sort of stuff, but I'd like to sort of change the words a little bit. You know, I talk about democratizing fine wine as something that I think the world needs to look at a little bit. And for us, that's really important because we want the world to see that there's a wider story of fine wine than just what comes from Western Europe. And I like to think of our people that are buying and drinking our wines are going to be what I call a new fine wine lover. And they're going to make a decision on what creates value in their eyes. And it's likely to be different from what has been traditional. I mean, the new generation are likely to be younger, with a more recent sense of prosperity, I guess. They may have a wine cabinet which will include some wines of heritage, although, to be honest, they're probably less likely to be driven by that alone. They'll be more interested in instant gratification, and therefore wines will need to deliver pleasure and excitement, you know, when they're released or soon after. Maybe they will have different values around how these wines look on the table, how they are made, and are they good for people and planet. Let's be clear, though, the new fine wine lovers, who I think the people that are going to be buying our wines, they want the pleasure for themselves first and foremost, and they probably want it now. And so despite the gloom, I think it's a pretty exciting time for fine wine producers now. I think the wines we're delivering globally drink well when they're young because of, you know, great technical ability and craftsmanship in the vineyard and cellar. And it's, you know, for us as aspiring producers of Chardonnay and Pinot, from a new place, a place that people don't really know about from a fine wine perspective, these fine wine people we can create value for. From what I can see, they do rely on the foundations of traditional fine wine, but they're willing to explore. And if they are provided with the roadmap, and that is the challenge for new fine wine producers, you you know, these people probably want a romantic relationship, I guess, with the new fine wine drinker, and there's no meeting place in the world for fine wine producers and fine wine lovers, or for new fine wine producers and new fine wine lovers, and you know, I think the more that we can curate that idea, then I think the more sort of successful we'll be with stuff. The other really interesting thing I think, as we're talking about that, is to think about how people make these decisions about the wines they're going to buy. Our fine wine's expensive, so how do you create value for them? And it's much more than just what's in the bottle. The really interesting thing for us, when we started our business, we set a pretty strong purpose and brand values. And for us, our purpose is to share the pleasure, culture, and craft of fine wine. And our values are based on the idea of natural made, which made being an acronym for modern art, design, and escape. And when we listen to people that visit us, we've got a very cool little Enoteque and private tasting studio in Havelock North. When we sit and listen to these new fine wine lovers, there are two quite surprising values that are really important to them. Pleasure being number one. And I think as wine producers and communicators and everybody associated with wine, is I think we forget that as a beverage, wine, certainly fine wine, can be one of the most pleasurable experiences you can have with a beverage. It links you back to nature. It links you back to tradition and heritage. It's absolutely delicious. And there's no better drink to be on a dining table with than a glass of great wine. And if I wanted to criticize where wine, I think's losing its way at the moment, I think it's trying to be everything to everybody, where this low alcohol movement is driving a lot of beverage wine companies to be producing wines that are highly industrial in the way that they're made, and to chase a zero or a lower alcohol benefit. Some of those are done naturally, the forest wines out of New Zealand being one, and they're doing a fantastic job. But I think when you're trying to chase a lot of other alcoholic beverages with that motive, you lose your way a little bit, and you lose what is special to wine. And I think wine has a unique place in the world where it links itself back to nature. It links itself back to heritage and tradition and rural communities and people. And underneath it all, if you find a wine that you love, it gives you great pleasure. So, yeah, I guess my point is, why chase a lower alcohol thing from a health perspective? Why can't we as fine wine producers encourage people to open a bottle of wine on a Monday and drink a glass of wine every day until the end of the week? The wine's going to be fine. Those wines don't fall over in the bottle over a week sitting there. And that is a much more pleasurable experience than at this point trying to find something with lower alcohol to reduce your alcohol intake. So, I think it's an interesting space for wine at the moment to be thinking about things through that lens. So from a marketing point of view, I think we've got to find a way really to connect with those people that are going to be our new fine wine lovers. And I think there's in today's, one of the other values that we have in our brand values is the idea of escape. And I think in today's crazy world where everything is connected, one of the most luxurious things you can do is escape from that world. And we see it when we host people in our private tasting studio where they've left the rest of the world behind, and we put them into a fully immersive experience that it takes them away from that world, and you can see the impact it has on them. We can see it on the faces of the people that visit us at Pyramid and do a vineyard tour where you're in the foothills of the Southern Alps. And we've had those people come back to us and say, I had a bottle of Lion's Tooth the other night. I'm back in New York. I had a bottle of Lion's Tooth the other night. It took me back to you, to your place. And I think if fine wine can capture that idea of this is somewhat of an escape from the crazy world that we're in into something that's real and it's it's not old-fashioned. But it has amazing tradition and heritage. And a lot of these wines are made by people that come from communities that rely on fine wine for their whole prosperity. So I think there's something in that from a marketing point of view. It sounds like a very complex situation, but I think if we can somehow, as a fine wine world, capture that idea and capture the idea that wine is in this world of health and alcohol has a very special part to play, and on a dining table nothing else comes close, then that's a place that we can sort of own a little bit, I think. Sorry, that was a little bit of a rant. But it's sort of something I absolutely, I think the wine world can be standoffish to people, and I think we need to instead of looking inward, we need to look outward and open our arms and invite people in. And we can, if you see what's happening in Burgundy now with what Jeremy's done with the hip hop thing, a second year of doing that. I mean, I spent a little bit of time with him in June and some of the thinking and stories behind that. I mean, that's incredible about opening up that fine wine world to people that maybe don't come from it originally, come from a totally different background, to be brought into it in a way that's very, very democratized. So it's not about status. It's not about who you are. It's about I want to be part of this because there's something special about it. And I think the more that we can do that and connect with this new set of consumers that are coming through and new fine wine lovers that are coming through in a way that embraces them, then I think that stands us in really good stead. How we go? I'm just going to pause for a minute here. No questions? No?
Anybody have
Okay,
a
we'll continue.
question?
Steve, I've got a question. Hi, nice to meet you, by the way. I'm Pippa.
Yes, I recognize. I haven't met yet, Pippa, but it's great what you're doing. I'm looking forward to getting to see you hopefully in January and February when I'm over.
Yeah, I'm actually coming to NZ, so hopefully I get to see you.
Love it.
And I've had a joy of sharing all of your wines with lots of our customers this year. So yeah, thrilled to meet you. I have been a big fan of your Smith and Chef range, and recently I believe they're no longer getting imported into the UK. Is that correct?
They are. We're just in an in-between phase.
Okay.
They will be.
There is
They
still-
will be. That will be corrected. Give the Hall Garden guys a call and tell them to get their act together.
Yeah, I did. I have.
Yes.
Because
No, that will definitely that's definitely happening. It's just in the move over from Louis Latour as they were closing Louis Latour down. It's just a stepwise thing. It will happen.
Yeah, because when you were talking about your Albarino, that's one of our best sellers, and so I'd be absolutely gutted if it wasn't still going to be over here.
They will be there alongside a suite of new Chardonnays that we're releasing from 2024, so they will be there for sure. But that's given me great ammunition again, so thank you. It's always good to have that.
No.
But thanks for what you're doing for New Zealand fine wine too. It's fantastic.
No, it's great to hear from you and learn from you.
Okay, so maybe one of my other sort of pet topics at the moment is this idea of how we go about protecting our most important part of what a fine wine business is, and that is our vineyards. And how do we get the best out of the vineyards that we have? And we're having to do that in a period where it's getting harder and harder to grow grapes in the ways that we wanted to because climate is having impact. Whether that be in Europe where it's getting hotter and drier, or dramatic weather events like frost and rainfall, it's becoming quite challenging. And as I said, it's the most valuable asset we have as fine wine producers, and they sit at the heart of what makes fine wine unique. And if you have a place that is truly distinctive and you love that place, it's your turanga waiwai. So in Māori, we have a wonderful word, turanga waiwai, which means your place to stand. So all of our great vineyards are the foundation stone for being able to create value for us, but also create value for our fine wine lovers that want to buy the wine and drink them. And I sort of, I come from a science background, but I now am very much a believer in what we're doing at Pyramid Valley with biodynamics and organics in a lot of ways. However, it's sort of interesting to think about where biodynamic and organic viticulture came from, or organics in all sorts of ways. They were an antidote to industrial viticulture, and every culture needs a counterculture, and that movement, whether it be in food or in wine or in many things, away from industrialized agriculture or industrialized production through the lens of biodynamics and organics, has done a lot to raise the awareness of natural production systems and what you can get as a benefit by growing things more naturally. And so in that, they deserve a lot of respect. But if you looked at it in a cold black and white moment, they're not really fit for today's world because they were not designed for today's world. The organic movement and biodynamic movement has come out of the first, well, from traditional ways of growing things, but biodynamics out of the early stages of the 20th century. So, and it's sort of interesting to me when you see, particularly some of the beginning producers that have taken this biodynamic approach or organic approach, and in some vintages are losing 70 or 80% of their crop. I find that hard to get my head around. And so I'm a really big believer in harnessing the power of nature to be our partner in the way that we grow things. And so the world needs that natural mindset for sure, but our vines will only thrive when modern science and technology are combined with natural wisdom, a culture of measuring outcomes, not controlling inputs, to create a viticultural system that allows our vines to thrive, and in doing so respects the planet, people, and most importantly, produces delicious wines. And I think that's the thing that is the most important thing at the moment, is we need to find a way to grow grapes and make wine in a natural way in this environment that we're in. But the most important thing it's first got to do is produce delicious wines. And so when we started at Pyramid in 2016, when we first looked at it and started looking after the vineyard in 2017, biodynamic basis, Nick Paulin came on board as my national viticulturalist, and he comes from a organic and biodynamic background. He worked for Peregrine and for Felton Road in that perspective, whereas I come from a background that is a lot more of a science background. But when I was at Lincoln University as Chancellor, I became really enamored, not very close to, the regenerative agricultural movement that was starting to sort of come back into vogue a little bit as a means of taking the best out of natural growing systems, putting them alongside science, and coming up with a system that is all about measuring outcomes. So let's be clear about biodynamics and organics. There's a lot about these systems that I absolutely love, but the thing that always bothers me with them is that they control inputs. They're not about outcomes. So the outcome is irrelevant. So you can still have these sort of growing systems that don't produce fruit that's really high quality, that yields poorly, but also in some instances is not actually that great for the environment. I don't know if you saw the news this week where the French have banned a whole lot of copper products from being able to be used in vineyards, which of course copper has been the basis of controlling downy mildew in vineyards for a very, very long time. It's not good for the environment, it's not good for the soil, but it's allowed in organic and biodynamic production systems. Sulfur, which is widely used for the control of powdery mildew, is one of the most destructive things for insect populations. And so if you're wanting to build up a diverse population of insects, and you're putting sulfur on every week or 10 days, and it's sometimes pretty high rates in organic systems because powdery mildew is becoming very invasive in our current climate. That's a real challenge.
So what do you suggest instead?
I'm getting to that, sorry.
Oh, sorry.
So one of the most, so we've started work on this idea of how do you do things, what's the new way, what's a better way to go about doing this? And the regenerative viticulture movement has got a lot of momentum in the last 2 or 3 years, and as like all of these things, when they get this sort of level of momentum, it can go off in all sorts of different directions. We've been working with this sort of approach now for almost a decade. And the way that I look at it is how can we make better wines where we've got an environment that is healthier, that our people are healthier, and everything works from a sustainability perspective. So the bedrock of regenerative agriculture is the idea of using soil to be your partner in creating a healthy environment for the plants that grow in them, and then any animals that are part of that system. We've started a cover crop program at actually all 3 vineyards that we own, starting in Lowburn in 2017, and then a little later on in our Omahu vineyard, to see if we can improve the health of our soil. And we've seen some incredible impacts by understanding the science behind cover crops, how cover crops work as a community of plants growing in a vineyard alongside vines, and what benefit they can actually give to the soil environment, because that's where the basis of your expression of place comes from, is how healthy and how comfortable your vines are in that soil. And we found an amazing impact of getting that right. And, I'm just going to show you now a photograph that was taken last week, which is this one here. Can you see that?
Oh, yes.
You got it?
Yes.
Yep.
Great. Okay, so this is taken last week. It's from a drone shot that we took. The vineyard in the foreground, that's green, is ours. That's the Pyramid Valley Lowburn property in the Lowburn Valley in central Otago. All of the green bits there are not vines. That is a cover crop with up to 15 different species of plants growing in it. If you look at the vineyard on the right, is a vineyard, it's on the hill, is a vineyard at the same stage of growth. Again, we've only just got budburst here, so you're not seeing vine leaves, which is a vineyard that is certified sustainable, but is thinking about it's growing grapes in a way that don't think about the ecosystem that they're in. The vines have had the rows have had herbicide under the vines, and a third of the land area is barren. And then at this time of the year, they go through and scalp the plants because they want to reduce the impact of frost. So when you look at that system, you say, well, what is potentially the healthiest environment here?
Mm.
And we know when we get an environment like that, we've got soil carbon levels that have gone up from 3% to 5.5% in 4 years. So that means there is an extra 200 to 250,000 litres of water sitting in the soil naturally that's being held on by the soil because of organic matter. What that has meant, the vineyard that you can see on the left-hand side in the valley is our Snake's Tongue vineyard. What that means is that vineyard, when we took this property over, was our worst vineyard. It now is our best vineyard, and it has been through our regenerative viticulture program over the last 6 or 7 years. For that vineyard last year, in a dry year, we didn't irrigate it. So that's a phenomenal thing to happen just by harnessing the power of the soil using plants. Not adding compost, not adding all of this other stuff, by using plants and understanding how those plants work together is the most important thing. So if you're in an organic system and you've got a cover crop, great, you get a tick. But if you're in a regenerative system, there's a whole lot of science that goes on behind the scenes, because what you're wanting to do is you're wanting to increase soil carbon, increase soil biodiversity, increase the health of the place, simply by doing that. It's a very, very, very powerful thing. The other thing that, of course, having carbon in the soil, what that does is by locking carbon in, it's a part of the sequestration of carbon. So every year, for every percent of extra carbon that we've got in that soil, we're sequestering anywhere up to 100 tons per hectare of carbon per year in the soil. So from a sustainability point of view, if you look at the wine production in a holistic sense, if you started at the scratch of what your vineyard is sitting at, and you think about how can I be part of this minimizing carbon and minimizing the impact that we have from an environmental point of view, let's look at our own land first, because that could well be the most powerful thing. So alongside
Steve,
regenerative,
Steve,
yeah, sorry.
Becky Sue had a quick question. Becky Sue, do you want to unmute yourself, or would you like me to ask? Becky Sue asks, what do the concepts of sustainable and regenerative mean to you? And is this different for what it means to other wine growers?
Well, sustainability to me is a word that means you're just sustaining what you have. I think we need to do better than that. I think we need to sometimes repair what's happened, but also create a better environment. So to me, sustainability is a baseline, which is a really good way of setting a baseline for what you then want to do. The tricky thing about regenerative is it hasn't been defined yet. And so everybody has their own sort of different view about it. It's one of the positives in it because it encourages innovation and a sort of an entrepreneurial approach to growing things. But the great challenge is how do you then wrap it around some principles of what regenerative might mean? And so I talk about the idea of Regenics, because you've got organics and biodynamics. So I think if you're going to have something like this, you need something with an X at the end. So so we talk about it with Regenics, and it's about how do we create a system of growing our grapes that continues to make delicious wine, that may be even better, that captures more carbon, that leaves no footprint. So even if I am using something that is synthetic, I know that it's leaving no footprint in the environment or in the fruit, and I know it's doing the right thing to make sure that I don't lose 70% of my crop. But I can only do that if I'm satisfying the other things that make things better. And so it's going through a phase of defining what it means. But I think for the future of viticulture, if you have a mindset that is based around regenerative thinking, then I think you're going to do things a little bit differently. And I honestly believe that if we can find a way to capture the idea in a way that organics and biodynamics is done for consumers, then I think it's a much more powerful way of farming than either of those systems. And it encourages us to get better all the time because you're continually regenerating, whereas the other systems don't. And so I think here's one of the big differences that I see if I'm thinking about putting my principles of Regenics together and what it means. Is one of the key things is embracing technology. It's a part of regenerative thinking. It's not part of the others. And science and technology will allow us to grow things and make things more naturally than what we've done in the past. So two examples, or one example that we're using now, drones. We've been using drones in our vineyard for 3 or 4 years. I know there's been a bit of press lately about people using them more recently. But drones have allowed us to reduce the impact of having machinery on the land in the spring by spraying. If you're spraying naturally, you're spraying 16 times a year. 12 of those sprays are done by a drone. It means you haven't got heavy machinery on soil and compacting it. Massive, massive impact. We're able to spray whenever we want to, as long as the weather's okay. You can cover the land quite quickly. Our use of sulfur has reduced 40%. Not because we've substituted it with other chemicals, but the drone technology has allowed us to become very precise with how we apply things. So embracing technology as part of that is really, really significant thing to do. I think I think that is part of the regenerative thinking that I think is really critical, is how do you embrace technology? And there's going to be two quite controversial ones that I'd probably put on the table now. Is all of the organic and biodynamic movement are vehemently against anything to do with genetic technologies. And they're doing that for a passionate reason, which is a lot of those technologies are scary, where you take a gene out of a frog and you put it in your tomato and it's resistant to black spot. That's not good genetic technology in anyone's world. However, modern genetic technology, such as CRISPR, has the ability to take the gene out of my Albarino vine that makes it resistant to botrytis and put it in my Chardonnay vine that is seriously challenged by botrytis. It's within the same species, it's within the same family. It would happen in nature if you gave it time. And we've been doing that sort of stuff using more basic technologies for 12,000 years from an agricultural perspective. So I believe that the regenerative movement will embrace a view of the use of genetic technologies that says if it's within the same species and if it's within the same family, then that's not a problem. But if it incorporates something wider than that, it's scary. The other really interesting thing that the world's going to have to get its head around is the use of alcohol reducing technology, which in the warming world of today, that is going to be something that I think the fine wine world is even going to have a look at, because we want to make sure that alcohols don't go through the roof, yet the environment is suggesting that they might. And modern alcohol removal technology, removing 0.5% or 1% of alcohol at a juice stage, in my experience, I'm not saying that we do that, because we don't, but I know people that do, has a very, very good impact on the finished quality of the wine. And I think a movement like a regenerative viticulture and wine growing perspective will embrace technologies like that, whereas organics and biodynamics won't.
There's a couple of other questions that have quickly appeared, Steve.
Yeah.
Michelle again is saying, when you're talking about embracing sort of new drinkers, she was asking what your thoughts were as far as marketing about screw caps and boxes for fine wines. And what do you think about them for making fine wine more accessible?
Well, all I can say is, well, that's a really interesting question. We have just moved our higher end wines, so you're talking 40 pounds and up, into DM10 Origine corks. We've been not wanting to use the DM corks up until now because the means of putting those corks back together again used a synthetic polymer, which we didn't like, and now largely uses beeswax to do that. So to me, if the fine wine, if the movement to consume fine wine is going to be at a dining table or in a lounge setting, not at a big picnic or a barbecue or a big picnic or at an event, then I think cork is a very appropriate way to look at it. But here's the thing, maybe we should be looking at smaller formats and screw caps that do make it easier. So I think you've got to be open to that. And in terms of packaging, in terms of boxes, there's a lot of wooden boxes used, there's a lot of cardboard boxes. I don't have a view on it, actually. But your question is related to what does the modern fine wine lover expect? And I think we've got to be very open to that. And I think they're going to be more about buying these wines and consuming them straight away, rather than cellaring them. However, I think one of the challenges as fine wine producers we're going to have to do is I think we're going to have to be keeping more cellar stock, because I think the new fine wine lover is not going to be, they're going to have a little wine fridge, maybe not a big cellar. But if they love the 2022 Lion's Tooth because we've just released it, and they say, well, have you got any aged stock? We're going to need to have aged stock. I think fine wine producers are going to have to keep aged stock on behalf of your modern fine wine lover, rather than them having the necessity of a cellar.
Thank you, Steve. There's a couple of comments here, one from Sarah Brown, who says she works on a fully organic and biodynamic vineyard in Surrey in the UK, and their net carbon zero. They sequester a huge amount of carbon and have a huge amount of biodiversity, with upwards of 20 different species under vines, including clover, fennel, wild carrots, strawberries, scarlet pimpernel, vetch, etc., all bringing different root depths and carbon capture. And they still need to use copper and sulfur, but less as the years have gone on.
Yeah, so I would argue that they are doing way more than what their organic certification requires. So that's a regenerative property that happens to have organics as a principal certification thing underneath it. So you can be organic and regenerative. There's no doubt about that. But not all organic vineyards are regenerative. That vineyard that you're working on sounds like a fantastic vineyard, and they've embraced the whole idea of regenerative thinking within an organic system, which, top marks.
And one other thing from Angela Lloyd is she says Molyneux Winery in Swartland in South Africa received certified regenerative organic certification from EcoCert next year. The only other winery she knows has that certification is Tablas Creek in Paso Robles. Is that something of interest to you or others in New Zealand?
Yeah, I mean, I think what we need to do is find a way to be able to communicate very transparently how we're growing our grapes and way we're making it. So the organic regenerative movement is a version of organic viticulture with regenerative as part of it. I think I'm much more about being very transparent about what we do, rather than the certification part of it, but certification gives consumers confidence, so it's a bit of a challenge. One thing I'd recommend everybody here to have a look, or to maybe read if you can, is in 2021, Cheval Blanc put out a manifesto of wine growing. That is probably the best way of looking at the modern viticultural world that I've ever experienced. And it's come from about 10 years worth of work they've been doing in their vineyards. And I think Cheval Blanc, I don't think it's they keep it under wraps. I think you can access it if you got hold of them. It's a really brilliant read. And to me, the way that they've looked at the modern viticultural world and the challenges of climate is absolutely first class. And it gives you a great basis to the way that I'm thinking about it as well.
Thank you, Steve. I think we're just about running close to finishing there. Is there one last couple of bits to add, or would you to that?
No, I think I've sort of, as normal with me, we've managed to go in all sorts of different directions at once. And it's, I mean, I think it's an incredible time to be growing grapes naturally, because I think there's so many more tools that we have than we had even 10 years ago. And the really amazing thing about growing grapes naturally is so many of our wines are made naturally with natural yeasts and with natural biology, and a lot of that comes from the viticultural vineyard environment. So a healthy vineyard, I think one of the biggest advances in fine wine production in the next couple of decades is going to be, how do you harness the natural biome that you have in your vineyard and cellars and use that to reflect the wines that you make? Because we certainly see an impact of that in the way that we approach things.
Thank you, Steve. I think that's. I'll hand over to Rosemary.
So if there are no more questions, Steve, thank you so much. I mean, I was expecting to have my horizons broadened, and I have. You've given certainly plenty of food for thought, and it's nice, well, fascinating to hear what the next stage is going to be after organics and biodynamics. We now get on to regenerative, and we're just looking at that wonderful vineyard shot. I mean, it speaks for itself, doesn't it? So many thanks for your thoughts, and I look forward to seeing you in London in late January.
I'll just stop absolutely, yeah, looking forward to that hugely. Although being in London at end of January, February is something I try to avoid. But there's lots of great people. Pippa, hopefully I'll be able to get out and see you. Would love to do that. And I see Kate's on the call as well. We look forward to catching up with you too, Kate. So anyway, thanks very much, everybody. I will let you go on to your evening and go and find a really good bottle of New Zealand Chardonnay and and have it with your supper.
Thank you very much, Steve. Thank you. Yes, enjoy your day. And
Bye.
Can I just put in a final word and add my thanks to Steve for an optimistic talk too. It's so good to have some optimism as well as pessimism about the future. But